questions, but I'm so fascinated by these. It's definitely stretching my brain, even though it makes me feel like I'm bringing my father into the room since he was an optics researcher, and was colorblind, and color is very, very important to the culture I come from. So thank you, all three of you. For James, and for the rest of you, just as a midwife, I will observe, I think any of the midwives in the room will agree that we often see the actual birth happen at dawn or at sunset. So birth, the onset of labor is one thing, maybe it starts at night, but birth takes time. Sometimes it's 24 hours, sometimes it's 12 hours, sometimes it's something longer. But when it actually sort of speeds or gets to that point, this is anecdotal, but am I right? Like it just it just happens at those transition moments. And I wonder if that also has something to do with light and circadian rhythm. It's just a thought for you all. But I think anybody would say, particularly those of us who attend people in the community where there's not a lot of external sort of bright lights and stuff. The second thought I had for you, James, is that I know that preterm birth is a big problem and is sexy to get funding, and people then listen and publish your things. But as a midwife, I'll tell you, I kept listening to you and thinking prodromal labor, and these labors that go on or that we can't, they're tired at night, and then are we trying to encourage it to continue through the night or stay at night? And these longer labors that, maybe they should sleep during the day, because I'm always telling people, try to get yourself to sleep at night so that if you go into labor later, or it gets more active. And I'm thinking now, I've been doing it wrong for 40 years because maybe we should be adding, maybe we should get some over-the-counter melatonin and help them get going through the night. And that, to me, is a much bigger data. Like, you can get those people to agree because they want to have their babies once they get started. And it's probably easier for you to get consent and get more people because it's not this high-risk situation.
That's really funny that you brought that up because the years I was at the medical school in Florida, we had a number of graduate students in the department who were pregnant. And when they heard me talking about this, they asked me much the same question. They wanted to get in and out as soon as possible. Should I take melatonin? Well, I couldn't tell them to do that. But two of them did it anyway, and they had their babies that night. I mean, it happened very quickly. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to publish that anywhere because I have no ethical approval for that. It's not a study I can.
But what I'm saying is it's probably easier for you to get ethical approval for people who are normal, healthy,
sure.
And, first-time moms have longer labor. So it may be easier than waiting and trying to predict who's going to go into preterm labor. That's my point.
Well, this is the whole challenge we're facing. In the case you're describing, it's raising melatonin levels acutely, above normal, presumably. In our case, with the light, it's suppressing them to something below normal. And FDA just doesn't like to deal with that because they say, well, what's going to happen to the baby? Is too much melatonin going to hurt them? Is too little melatonin? And we have no way to prove that. I mean, any animal data you look at, no problem. The pups are fully intact, normal, the rhythms are fine. We'd have no reason to think it's dangerous. And in fact, many women, I think, have started taking melatonin during pregnancy, even though it says on the bottle not to, for sleep. And so they're self-medicating in a sense. What that does to their labor, I have no idea, because it's never been studied in that sense, yeah. But that's a really good point.
But that's a really interesting thing that the FDA would have such trouble with such a mild thing while they let all kinds of things like women, get shot up with fentanyl, yeah. And no one even tells them that's what's going into their spine. No one tells. Did you know that it's fentanyl mostly now? It's been opium, morphine, et cetera. But I recently read things about women in the U.S. who, the baby has fentanyl in the meconium, and they say, "Oh, you are a drug addict. I'm taking your baby," and so on. I mean, I've read news stories of this. So oh, no, it doesn't cross over to the baby. How is it that? And so I think that partly what we see and know is that there's such discrimination in the research world, and that actually highlighting, utilizing groups like this and, women's research by and for women is really important because it's been absent. I remember the studies about oxytocin that originally were, I think that Uvnus Moberg talks about, that they first started, the studies, they had men and women in the studies, and then at some point they went, oh, we aren't getting enough results from the women, let's go just get rid of them, we'll just do the men, and that's where they got the flight and, that what is it called? Fight or flight syndrome, and that on the women's side, it's not that. It's calm and comfort, calm, connect, yeah. So
I was just going to add, there is actually a study at the moment in Western Australia being done by a midwife looking at induction of labour using melatonin, which
Who is doing that?
I'm not sure how I feel about it. Zoe Bradfield, her name is, who's leading
I've
that.
actually spoken with her once, yeah. She was one of the
Probably
first
where
people.
she got the idea from. You.
She actually was going to get back to me when I moved, and so she probably lost me in the transition. I'll have to contact
I'll send her a message and see.
Yes, I will. No.
Since you looked at melatonin, and somebody earlier talked about sort of the unique physiologic cocktail of endogenous oxytocin, did you see any, or did you look at the differences on the myometrium with endogenous melatonin versus a supplement? Is there that same kind of like special cocktail?
In the studies or the one study I showed with the cells in the dish, we did look at the interaction of oxytocin and melatonin at physiological levels. But we couldn't do this in vivo, obviously.
I have a question for James. So this notion that blue light shuts down contractions, and then, in the looking at, well, you could look at Carolina's work, or you could look at the many images online where they're beginning to use groovy LED lights that go, you can change them into any color you want. And I remember I was speaking with some midwives in India who were redesigning a birth plate, and they sent me photographs of this woman sitting in their new birthing room that they were so excited about, and she was just absolutely bathed in blue light. And that, for me, just having come across your research quite recently before that, I was just horrified to see that and to think that that's what we were doing. We're now going to outfit all these birthing rooms with, you can choose the color of lighting. I mean, if it would be interesting to do a test and see if women chose blue light, or if we just think, oh, blue light is calming, or it's like the ocean or the sky or whatever. And so who chose that for her? Was it already sitting there waiting for her when she walked into the room because it was like nighttime? Yeah, all those kind of color associations are pretty interesting, but what I want to know is, how do we get this information that's why you're here, honestly, is I want what I want all these people to know it, because I think it's kind of critical for women. We know, and I think the first time I saw the stuff about your work, it was a newspaper article, and it talked about bright light, not just blue light, but bright light, like walking into the hospital and down the corridor with the bright white light, and how your contractions then would stop. And I thought, well, yes, of course, and we need to change that. We need to make sure that's not happening, or it's just because that's our number one problem. All the induction happens because it's stalled labor and so on. So I feel like you have critical information to offer.
Well, thank you. Actually, what you say is exactly right. I don't know how many times in talking with OBGYNs about this concept, they bring up an anecdote. They say, oh, well, that explains something I've encountered many times in my career, where the woman's at home and the doctor says, call me if the contractions start. She does, and the physician says, come into the hospital or the clinic. They get there with the bright lights and they stop contracting. And I've heard this so many times, and I said, well, maybe it's the bright lights, turn down the lights. But who's going to do that?
Well, and I remember Ellen Hodnett telling me that in one of these studies that she was just setting up the ambient room, the doctor said, whatever you do, don't change the light. And of course, you know what the light is. It's the bright light and then potentially the big, operative thing,
Well, there's definitely resistance in the medical profession to doing that, presumably for whatever liability issue, who knows? But it's what they're used to, and they feel that's fine, yeah. As far as the blue light effects of the birthing room you were describing, one has to realize, and I think we heard this just now, that blue light is effective because of the melanopsin system in the retina, but it has to be a certain intensity. If it's a low enough intensity, it won't have a severe effect. The TV screen issue, that's bogus. You hear it from all over. It's not a bright enough TV screen to really matter for sleep. They've been pushing that because they want to sell their light blocking goggles or whatever, blue light, it's really not enough. Unless you're right here at the screen, it's just not going to be enough light. If it's bright enough, though, it is an issue, and you don't want that. I mean, you're going to inhibit contractions, sure.
Does it make a difference whether that light is, coming down or is
Oh, sure.
right? You want it right. This is the bad stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Right
Yeah.
here.
I mean, the amount of illumination the retina perceives is directly correlated to the amount of disturbance. Yeah.
I can also add some information to that, but when we measure light, for example, for vision, for light intensity for images, we must do it in an horizontal way, but every time that is for circadian stimulation, and actually the world standard demands it in the performance test, it must be vertical at the height of your eye. So, but they have a standard of 1.20 meters or something like that. But it's they try to make it for children and for adults. So they decide it's 120 centimeters.
So cell phones are worse than TVs, right? Because at night when they do that.
Well, again, it's a matter of intensity. Generally, it's not a problem, at least from what I've been reading recently. Most studies don't show a major effect of a cell phone at that distance.
Helpful to know.
But of course, if you're on it for 3-4 hours,
Yeah.
that's just light. It's
Right.
irregardless of the wavelength, you're just getting too much light at night, yeah.
I think light changing, when you come into the hospital, you're in good labor at home, and then you come into the hospital. Light certainly may be part of it, but that happens even during the daytime, right?
Exactly.
So we have to remember we're mammals, and we create our safe spaces. We get into a rhythm, and then we disturb labor by moving people or having them have interaction and having people asking them questions, and they're pulled from the right brain. So there's a lot. It's much more complex than just light. So with respect.
How about fire? Have you looked at fire at all, and the color of fire, and the like what's happening with our brain when we're around a fire, and if
Yeah.
there's light that emulates that kind of returning to the bonfire of the
Yeah,
home? the
interestingly,
physical
there have been studies, not with uterine contractions, but with effects on rhythms and so on. Fire does not have the wavelengths or the intensity, even right in front of you, to affect the clock. It's just too dim. Yeah, even candles, The problem really only started in the 90s when we started switching away from incandescent lights to LEDs. because LEDs have a peak blue, all of them. We really have to get rid of LEDs because they're causing a lot of problems in our society, not just in this context, but with sleep disorders, with obesity, with cardiovascular disease, and it's the blue spectrum of the LED lights. And everyone's going to them now. They're booming, well, because of energy efficiency. I know, but it's a real paradox, you know. Yeah.
I have a question on, this is the whole dynamics of, I really love this graph, James, you showed with like the rise in melatonin, and then like, it was so beautiful communicated, thank you. So, but
Thank my artist friend who drew that.
but so my question, so when I talk to the musician, she says that we have to meet the woman in labor in the attunement. She used the word attunement, so that it's in the same mental set as she comes. So it's really important that we meet her where she are. If it's the night, she has to be met in the nighttime atmosphere. And if it's morning, everything is included, like the lighting, like all that. But the attunement is a really interesting concept here, because she also says she can make you dance by playing music. But she has to meet you where you are. So when she do concerts, she works with the audience and make them dance. So I'm just saying that if we can use the spaces as instruments in a way and play on them as she play on her instruments, how could you imagine that we could play with the lamps, with the light, as the musicians play with music?
Well, that might be a question for you, right? With the changing of colors during the nighttime, because different colors have different impacts on our physiology. Green impacts our physiology differently from orange and yellow, from red. You know, each color has its own effects. So yeah, that would.
I can add that right now most of the systems are dimmable and tunable. Tunable, that means that you can change the color temperature. That is not going to change only the aspect of the light as itself, but also the colors that we see in the space. Right now, what I think is that we must to know how to use the color in the space. If we see and if we realize the strategy, okay, lighting systems are very expensive, but the strategy of painting a wall is not expensive. I think it's one of the less expensive retrofit strategies that exist in the places. So I think next time when we must to design, we need to think that, first of all, engage a very good contractor, electrician that is going to know how to make the connections and the interrupters to manage the light inside, but also to don't be afraid of use color, of course, in the proper way. Sometimes when we use too much color, it's not good also, but I think it's how to use the color in the space.
So, yeah, when you started saying that, there is a study that's published by, are they Danish, or is it from the group of midwives in Denmark, or is it Swedish? But it is a study in which they do a kind of mood study, and they use different colored lights at different parts of it. Does anybody remember this study?
A room for birth?
What?
Room for birth.
Yeah.
Sweden, I think.
Who said that? Who said? In any case, I looked at it and went, oh, that's interesting. And I noted where they used the blue light, and I went, not sure about that. So there I am kind of doing that. But I kind of agree with you that there could be, it's just a question of, I think color, I did a lit review about who said anything about color in birth space, and kind of pulled out things again. And the really the key finding was this business about melatonin, right? But again, we don't quite know what to do with that in the environmental setting, except don't blast people out with turquoise bright light, you know? And you may say, why on the website are we using turquoise and blue and so on? We're not trying to, people aren't giving birth while they look at the website. We're trying to keep them awake. Anyway, so I think that's I love talking with Marie. She's the composer you're talking about, and this notion of attunement is such a beautiful word to think about. Do you know Perez Gomez? He's a Canadian. I had one of his quotes somewhere in my things, and he writes beautiful philosophical stuff about the attunement that we have with environment, and that we need to think about architecture as attunement. And I think it's a huge idea, and the thought that you could, well, that with what you were showing, you certainly can modulate and play with atmosphere and so on, and I'm sure that northern peoples and southern peoples and people at the equator have very different sensibilities. And I know from Lit Review that you know, healthcare, color in health space, color and light in health space is totally not a thing you can, you know, just cite the research on. It's first of all, it's very hard to prove anything environmentally. You know, this caused that, not so much. You know, it's not going to work like that. But I think you can do it in other more, you know, qualitative ways that have like a triadic, you know, system of research, so you can kind of use the comments people make and correlate that with certain other factors and build out some evidence. But I also noted that in Nuevo Belén, the comments made by one of the women who gave birth there was there were 3 rooms with 3 different colors, or 4 rooms, different colors. And when she got there, she said, and she knew these rooms already, she'd been there, and she hadn't chosen one as the color room she wanted. And when she got there, she said, "You choose," to the midwife. I don't want one more decision. I don't want to think about it. You know, just you'll choose the right thing. Well, that was a nice indicator that she and her, you know, she trusted that midwife, and they were in good sync. But then the architect, not Marta, but Angela, who's with us, said in the interview that certain, what did she say? German women always choose the blue room. I mean, I don't know if this is just gross, you know, whatever you want to call that. Yeah, it would be, it's kind of interesting to test out whether people want different things and can choose, but also at that time they probably don't really want to make such choices, but that the room has some flexibility to change, and that's what you did so well in your project, Esben, is that, and I love that you didn't just make it, you walk in and it's, you know, a blue sky and ocean or something. No, it's attuned to the right time of day. And the midwives talked about that in the room. They loved that, and that pride you talked about. They were very proud of that they could offer this to the women. They felt like they had something to give, and it immediately set a tone. And the fact that it was morning and you walked in and it was morning and it was, or that it was nighttime and it was nighttime, it just felt right, you know? So I think it's always like looking for what feels right, and also being attuned to this thing we've been talking about since yesterday of different cultures have completely different sensibilities, artwork, ways of making art, or ways of making architecture, and it always comes from their land and their own kind of sky, you know, and all those things that are familiar to them. So familiarity, like making it home-like, but familiarity is so much about that connection of setting and connection to, and that's why in my work I came to it and went, you know, it has to be about this isn't, I can't connect to that, but I can connect to the lake. From my hotel room, I go, yeah, I like this. I like the fact that people here are looking out at the ocean, the sea, no, sorry, Lake Ontario. And that it's a connector to this place. It's one of the Great Lakes. It's one of the amazing things about this part of the world. So, and that connects you to what's south, what's north. My students don't have a clue where north or south is, you know? My daughter says when you put the map, the Google map, you know, and you set it so the north is up, she's like, no, 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 turn it around this way. This is the way I'm driving. It's like, she has no idea what north and south is when she's driving. She just follows the damn map, you know? And that's what everybody's doing now. But this orientation to, James Gibson says that the world is symmetrical to us in our experience of light. In the morning, it's all dark as the sun's coming up this way, everything's dark, shaded on that side. And in the afternoon, it's all shaded on the other side. That is such a deep, you know, but simple idea about how our perception system makes sense of things and understands things, and you know, it's kind of huge, but it's nothing in our world. It just poof, you know. So I feel all of that is built into our systems from millennia and millennia and millennia, and in your part of your world, you know, when you showed the in Aboriginal peoples, and their parts of world are so specific. You know, it's a different color on that earth, from that earth. I remember being in England and driving around in small towns. I lived there for a couple of years. And you drive to the next town, and the stone, the buildings are made of a different stone, so they're a different color. They all have their own identity that way. You would know that, you know, in your deep bones. No, yeah, anyway.
Thank you for the three. I think it's been three different expositions, but like in a circadian circle, because you started with these images, spontaneous and with color and shapes, and I think you finished with the same images, but after putting all that images in a machine just to understand them. So I think you started and you finished in, it inspires me to know. And in the middle, you told us how to create different things, just stopping light. For several years, we were trying to know which was the color of the birth. So we asked for midwives that worked at home all the time, which color you think is the color of the birth? Which, after several years, we don't know. I mean, depending on the birth, depending on the woman and whatever. But traveling around Holland, more than one midwife told us that orange and Bordeaux, you know the color of Bordeaux? ¿Cuál es?
I think it's burgundy.
Borgoña, sí, okay.
Burgundy, like this, yeah.
Like red wine, you know?
As your scarf.
Yeah, more or less, yeah. Between orange and that color, they say it's like colors of the uterus or the sand or whatever. So we visited a birth home, and there was a special room that it was completely different than the rest, much darker, and we asked, it has the name was the Queen Room, and we asked what was it for, what happened with this room, and we were told this room was different. It was darker with no bright colors, because this was the room that women that had been abused, sexual abused, they need they need another conditions for birth, much more, I don't know, undisturbed, and they thought this kind of atmosphere much more, I don't know, calm and dark, they could help this kind of childbirth in women. So I have no, I'm not convinced about the color of the birth, but all that things inspires me to continue just asking each other which is the color of the birth, or depending on the
the founder of Terra Alta, the Swiss one, she's a midwife, and she said, the walls in there I particularly noticed because they were sort of shades of pinkish or greenish or beigeish, but all sort of in a certain kind of lighting, it all melded together. And of course, with those kind of tones, depending on what the light is on and where you are, it shifts all the time. And it was a very subtle, warm, cool thing that was going on. And so I asked something about it, and the architect told us that they had just told the painter to go ahead and do his thing, and that's what he did. I don't believe it. Because then the founder told us that she was really thinking about warm and cool, and that she thought she should do it a lot more the next time out, because women need the choice between warm and cool. Sometimes they get really hot and they just want coolness, and other times they get really cold and they want warmth. And you need to accommodate that, right? I mean, you can't sleep or rest if your, feet are cold, or so this notion that look at this room, it's got warm and cool colors in it, and even back there where it's white, but it's low light, it looks like sort of a grayish blue, right? So and what I found in this work that I was doing was realizing that this is good, because I'm here in the bright light, but now I might want to go over there because it's dark. And I need to have that cue that I should go over there, and that I could go over there, that I can get out of the light, that I can get into the darkness. But if the darkness makes me feel cold or sad, I can get into the light, get into the warmth. And I love the comment by Monia, I think, about, when I see the sun, I want to, feeling it is really interesting. It was really good. And I feel like we all love sitting in the sun, lying in the sun, right? It just talk about something that relaxes you. Just, you can just feel it. So I think we need to use a lot more of our guttural knowledge, that our actual, what we know in our bodies, and pay attention to that and think about how, and if you think, so I made a lot of things and then was like, well, what is that telling me? What is this about even? And I would realize it was about movement. I think I called it mental walking in one set of images I made for the PhD. Mental walking, what is that? Well, what it meant to me was, it suggested to me that I could move, and it privileged the idea of moving. And a curved thing like this, with a bunch of columns, makes me want to really move in that kind of way. That's way better than moving to that door at the end of this room in a straight line, right? So if I can flow. Children in a house, have you ever been in a house where there's no circular circulation for children? If they have circular circulation, they can run through all the rooms like this. They will be doing that almost instantly in your house, and they won't stop until they leave. But if you give them a horrible corridor like this to run up and down, someone will get injured, and everyone will be screaming pretty soon, So it's real circular, this notion of, will it move from this rectangular world to something curved? I do remember back in the day, maybe 30 years ago, if anybody in our school tried to design a curved building, almost all the faculty, all male, would say, no, it's not possible. No, just get rid of those. You can't do that, you know. Well, then, as time went on, all of the architecture, you know, all the cool, groovy architects were making wildly curvaceous things, and so now they have license to do it because, well, see, it's like that. I said, just point them to some buildings that do exist and are like that, and say, like that. And there you've got it, right? Just have your precedents on the table with you so you can prove that it can be done. And yeah, so there we go.
Just a short question to Carolina. Carolina, you know, what time do women in the northern areas give birth? If it's also during the summer, you mean if there's no night, what's happening with the clock?
Oh, actually, during I can't say at what moment of the day or which month of the year they are giving birth, but I can say what I saw is that we thought that First Nations, they are used to these changes of light during the day, but actually no, they are always, there is a huge percentage of people, they develop depression, seasonal affective disorder actually, obesity and depression problems because of the light. And what we saw during April, I would say, because April, May, is that they have problems to go to bed. At 3 a.m., we listen people outside and kids playing, and something that it was very funny when I heard that is that a family, they went to fish, and they were super excited doing all the activities. They came back home and they say, oh my gosh, it's 3 a.m. And they didn't realize because they don't feel tired because there is light all the time. So, of course, that makes you feel you're awake, but you're tired at the same time. It's a little bit as what James told, that you feel sleepy, but it doesn't improve the sleep quality. So we think they are used to, but no. So I think architectural design should help to continue these processes, using blinds, using intelligent facades. During the winter, use the proper light at the proper time. Actually, there is an article that it says use the proper light at the proper time. So design intelligent for the communities and base it on the climate and the context.
To your question about when in the year, I think of the classic study by Aschoff in the early 90s from Germany. They looked at 30 billion birth records over 300 years back and showed that there were clear seasonal patterns of birth, especially in the northern latitudes where the seasons are the most extreme. In fact, in winter months, 100 years ago or more, women stopped menstruating for 2-3 months during the winter. I mean, light is so important to our physiology, right? Interestingly, they showed in this study, since they covered 300 years of records, that those countries that industrialized first, brought in electrical lighting, they lost their rhythms, the seasonal rhythms, because it's the same winter or summer. Light is there, right? It's a really fascinating classic study in the early 90s. Yeah.
So when were the peak?
Back then, the primordial, you might say, season for humans, again, it was a little bit dependent on the latitude, but generally speaking, it would be in the spring, is when the births came.
It still kind of is like that.
There are populations where you still see that, that's true, yeah. But with the lighting, it's all messed up, you know?
I remember early on in my PhD. I was in Ireland, and I was traveling around to some standing stone kind of sites, and one place had a little shop, and I went in and I bought a Celtic calendar, and I had it in my studio for a long time. It actually influenced me quite a bit, thinking about that as a time thing, and what would the natural. And I remember thinking in spring, when I was at my studio, which is at the lake, and there's a lot of animals and creatures and things growing, and I remember thinking, oh, so if I were, living in some other time and was now and pregnant, I'd be giving birth now with all the animals and creatures, and it correlated back to the Celtic calendar, and one of their, they had these quarter festivals, yeah.
It's the word is involved. It means from the belly, and it's the beginning of spring, and it's the 1st of February. We have a celebration.
But if you go back 9 months, you get to one of those, Beltane, or is it Beltane? And those were big, like, fire festivals, like, with lots of fertility stuff going on, everybody getting it on and having a big party, right? And then lots of babies, yeah.
I would encourage, just as a clinician here, I would encourage the architects and designers to not get too stuck on the moment of birth or even the moment of onset of labor, because labor varies in its length, and whether or not that's productive length or not, it varies very widely by people. And I think what we should be focusing on are those environments that support people to do a marathon if they need to, or to get on with it if they need to. And that also could be individualized. But everybody talks about when do births happen, when do births start, and as midwives, we know it's dynamic, and sometimes we have to encourage people to walk and stimulate the labors, and sometimes they need to rest because they're tired. And so I love this concept of adjusting lighting and space, and what you were saying, Doreen, about, maybe I need now to go to the dark, or maybe I need to brush my teeth and wake up and get things going. I think it's really the process, the kairos of light labor. It's not the moment of birth.
Thank you all. I appreciate each of you for various different reasons, and I will be brief because I'm feeling the sitting is like intuitive nudging of like, let's move now. But those intuitive nudges, I think, are just really so important to help people direct themselves through space. I appreciated your use of the word biophilia and a new approach to it, new being not as there's so much about the plants. And I think we don't really need a view out of the window at nature. We need to put our feet on the earth or be under the clouds. So actual contact is, but so I appreciate that. Thank you. And Doreen, it was beautiful to see your presentation. I just always love it. I saw that once in the UK, and I thought, I need more of that. Do it for longer. So, and thank you for giving everybody the approach to our work and the website and the tour. I think it's really important. I just want to reiterate, hope everybody goes and spreads the word and visits and submits once we figure that out, how to add more case studies. But it's so, it has that, your importance of what you do is not, I'm not sure you really know. Your body of work is extremely powerful. And so keep it in the yes, this is important and powerful, not this, yes, it's playing, describe it the way you describe it, be you, but just, know how much that has, I think, a very positive influence. And I have, for you, James, the information on my special mask I wear at night. I described the first time we went to the UK. I went to pick it up to help heal my diabetic retinopathy, and it's a organic light-emitting diode, OLED, and it's a low-level green. I was looking it up. I think it's 550 nanometers. So I've got that information written down for you so you can make a contact because it's just so fascinating how we're connecting the dots on the science and the art and the healing and the restoration and the ways we can just keep generating more of this new paradigm that we're shaping. So fabulous. Thank you. That's all.
Thank
You can comment if you want, but thank you.